I'm a recording engineer and I work at Jukasa Studios, about 20 minutes south of Hamilton. Well, I think it all started when I made the decision that I want to have music as a career, but more on the technical side. And from there on, just researched what is out there. And I used to work in a radio station beforehand, but it wasn't really what I wanted. And as soon as I went to an open house of one of the recording schools I went to, I immediately fell in love with the console and knew that's it. So that's basically when it all in my head started. And that's really the most important step. Like once you know you want something, that's more important than actually just doing a thing here and there. And I think from there, just exploring other audio options. I was also in broadcasting and I did film, but I always knew I wanted to go back to music. So when I basically did that decision that I'm going to write a bunch of studios and get out there and get more experience from other people after school, because I believe in you need to learn from experienced professionals after school that actually do it for a living before you just go out and do your own studio thing and just figure it out, because you learn so much valuable things and tricks and just workflow from people that have done it for decades. That is just something you will not learn at school ever, I feel like. And it's something you also have to do in the situation itself. You can't just learn about it in theory and just do like one or two projects and that's it. You have to actually go through that process of working in that way. So working in an environment where you can and have to always constantly switch your thinking is very valuable. I think the first one was when I was chosen as one of the 10 best audio engineering students in Europe by AKG in 2010, because it just gave me this little boost of like, yes, it's the right thing you're doing, and then stay in the studio realm. Another one was getting the job at the studio and staying, although most people that tried to get this job ahead of me was like more than half a dozen, and they didn't stay for different reasons. Sometimes it socially didn't work out, sometimes the work ethic didn't work out. And just the fact that I was able to stay and was needed, that helped a lot. And on top of that, just having a bunch of, job offers too is always something that makes you just realize, yes, I'm not just, imposter that just tries to like do this thing. No, I actually belong here. Also just gradually seeing that like in the last 7 years I've worked at Jukasa, the bands that I work with are getting bigger and more known. So this definitely helps a lot. Like working with bands like Alexis on Fire and 3 Days Grace, just you get to a point where the musicians even teach you things about your workflow that you have to figure out. Because the more experienced the musicians get, the quicker you have to work, because they don't have the time to wait for you to just arm a track real quick and make a new track and put the input out and the output. If they have an idea, record. So you have to be ready right away. And the bigger the bands, the quicker you have to be. So I'm really glad that like I just got thrown in there and just slowly elevate, and we'll see where it gets. Be prepared. Like sometimes you have bands that don't even know the tempo of the song, or they don't even really know their guitar parts or the harmonies, and they figure it out in the studio. And it's just a very expensive experience if you figure it out in the studio. And usually for your first recording, you do not have that luxury unless you have some kind of funds from, grants or personal funds. But even then, like, why waste it on not being prepared when you can do it ahead of time? Like, everybody can have like GarageBand even on their phone to just, record like a part. Is it a guitar part or a singing part? And then record on top of it to see how it works. And even if the BPM isn't set, at least have like an about range where it could be and then try it out. But when people come in and haven't even played to a click before, unless it's something like folk music or some other musics that don't require necessarily a click, like bluegrass, like, yeah, sure, you don't need that. But for any rock band, have a click ready, be prepared, and practice and practice and practice. Have your lyrics written down on a sheet in big enough letters that you can read it, but also try to not need them. Like the worst is when you try to sing and you read off, because you can tell it's not really singing. So know your lyrics, but if you need them, have them like in bold letters on pages, so you don't have to print them out and wait for that. Know where your breaks are if you have a break in the tempo. Know how many bars in it is. Make sure you have your food kind of covered. You don't want to be halfway through the session, then somebody gets hangry, and then you have to figure out where does the food come from. Things like that. Just be prepared for every little thing, because they will slow you down. And once you're slowed down, you might not get back into it. I think the first challenge is when people can actually hear themselves, because when they're in a jam room, there's a lot of times they don't hear what the bass player is playing as opposed to the guitar player because everything's so loud. And then there might be parts where the notes just don't match up. Another challenge is people are not used to tuning as much. I make people tune after every take, because you can have the best performance you want, but if it's out of tune, yeah, you could do it with a plugin, but it does change the sound. And I don't believe that you should go to a studio to record a great sound and then just alter it with a plugin just so it's in tune when you can tune ahead of time. And especially for vocals, have your harmonies ready. Like, it's really hard, and I get it, like especially if it's only one singer and he has to sing to himself, it's really hard to figure it out. But just try it out ahead of time. And another thing is, we've had a band once where they only practice with the drummer on the click and not the rest of the band. And then the rest of the band found out in the studio that the drummer didn't play to the click. He just had the click in his head. So like everybody should be able to play with a click. And then you can also see if maybe there is a weakness somewhere, which, I mean, is everything can be changed. If there is a weakness and the drummer cannot play to a click, something he can learn. You can prepare that. It doesn't mean that you have to change the drummer. It just means that the drummer has to work on this specific topic more. And also try to figure out how to communicate what you want. When you say higher or lower, like you want a note higher or lower, be more specific. Do you mean the pitch or do you mean the volume? Because that happens all the time. And also, like, communication is very important in general, but especially with music where it's hard to say what you want, the more specific you are, the better. Like when you say you want the bass up, make sure you mean the bass instrument and not the bass drum. Because that also happens a lot where people say, I want the bass up, you put the bass instrument up, and they're like, no, the bass drum. It's like, well, that's why we usually say kick in the studio. So there isn't this, miscommunication, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
And have your guitar tones ready. Like if you have the amps, try to figure out what kind of tones you're going for.
Can you repeat that story just because I was like laughing, and I'm going to cut myself out of here because that is, I'm like, yes. Again.
And have your guitar tones ready, because that's something that might require a little bit of like trying out, like take screenshots with your phone of how it's supposed to sound, and you can still tweak it in the studio and make it sound like a little bit better, or use a different pedal. But if you have like the general scope of things, then also the engineer knows better what you're going for, because for me, it's the first time hearing the song usually. So if you already tell me how you want it to sound, that helps me knowing what to go for. Sacrifices, I think everybody is very sure that you will not work 9 to 5 ever, unless you work in the studio with jazz and country. I think that's the only two genres that kind of depended only from 9 to 5. But aside from that, just you can work on Sunday at midnight or until 3 in the morning. You never know, because you can't stop creativity. If somebody is in the process of something, you can't stop them. So your work becomes your life. So if you don't think that that's something you can do, and it's also going to be the rest of your life. I don't know anybody that retires, really. I've never heard of anybody that's like, well, I'm 65, I'm going into retirement right now. Doesn't happen. So you have to be sure that this is going to be your life. This is not your work. This is not your passion, not just your hobby. This is your life. There will be so many birthdays you'll miss. There will be weddings you'll miss. You might be on tour somewhere, or you might be on a remote session somewhere and not talk to your family for like weeks. Although, to be honest, technology has made it easier. But yeah, it's just, you will sacrifice so much personal life. So you have to be 100% sure this is what you want to do. I tell people don't do it. And then if they still do it, then they are meant to do it. But if I say don't do it and you don't do it, then you weren't meant for it anyways. Because you will get to points where you might feel like you're burning out. But that's just like almost every 2 years or every year. It happens constantly. So get used to being stressed, but in a positive way. If you love it, you'll have positive stress, but you'll have stress 100%. I think the biggest mistake is the time management, because people think, okay, we go to the jam space, we play the song 3, 4 times, that's like an hour, so we can get that many songs done in that time. Well, in the recording studio, everything's under a microscope. So first of all, you have setup time. We try to be super quick, and usually it's like under an hour, depending on how big the setup is. But then you have also to put into perspective, if you make a mistake, you have to do it again. Listening back. We usually say on average, it takes a day to a day and a half for a song. Some people come in and think, and that's like the full song, like with overdubs and everything. If you only do like guitar and drums and bass, then it might take a little less when you're already set up. But on average, it's about a day until a day and a half. So if you have 3 days booked in the studio, don't plan on more than 3 songs unless you're only doing the beds, because that is just unfortunately one of those things where young bands get super discouraged. They're like, oh my God, we plan to do 15 songs in 3 days. Like, yeah, you can, like, it would work if you play them live. And some bands can do that depending on what you want to do with a song. If you want to live feel and record it live. But for most bands, like, no. And I just hate when people get bummed because they don't get done what they want to get done. But you have to be more realistic. Even just asking the studio, like, what do you think? How long will it take? Might help. But time management is just, it's just a bummer. And then when you have a bummer, you have a bad experience. And when you have a bad experience, you just don't feel the song, and then you're not really happy with the song. And it just creates all of these negative emotions that you don't need. Just plan more time than you think you need, because most likely you will need more time. Practice, 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 and just be open to take advice from people. Like, it's really a bummer when you work with people and they're like, yeah, we want your input. You give them your input and then they don't like your input. And you're like, okay, so you don't want me to say something. You don't want me to say if you're singing a word wrong. You don't want me to say when you make a mistake in the guitar track. Okay, but like, it would be better if you're open for advice, because the music industry is one of those rare things where you will learn for the rest of your life. Like when I'm 80 and still working, I'm still going to learn things. And probably from younger people too, because they have different interests. Maybe they're better in a, like maybe they have a different focus where they're better at. Like you'll always learn. So just be open, because if you close yourself up and think you're the shit, you are not. You will most likely not be the greatest player ever yet, but you can be if you just, take advice from people and just work on it and try to also find your own tone. Like nobody needs to have 10 guitar players that all have the same playing style. It's good to be able to play other people's playing style so you can learn from it, but you also have to figure out what you want to do, because in the end, it's all about unique things you can contribute to this industry.